So welcome. It's very nice to have you all here. My name is Dora. I'm one of the organizers of Qesher, and I see a lot of familiar faces. It's very nice to have you all here. And if you're joining us for the first time, then we really hope that you will enjoy today's session. Our main activity is to introduce Jewish communities from all over the world. So many of you have attended our past sessions in which we learn about a specific Jewish community's history and culture and present-day situation, which is something that we're going to do also with Nina this Sunday about Venice and Venice's Jewish community and Jewish history. But today's presentation is part of another series, which we named the Qesher Book Club, in which we introduce Jewish-themed books that we feel like somehow are connected to our overall theme of Jewish life around the world. And this is what we're going to do today. Nina is going to present her book, which is called The Gallery of Beauties. And I'm just going to share very briefly about Nina, and then I'll pass the word to her to share about her book. So Nina Wachsman is a descendant of a chief rabbi of Venice, and her family's Sabbath candlesticks were supposedly sourced from the ghetto. She's the author of a series of historical suspense novels set in Renaissance Venice. When she's not writing her novels, Nina runs a digital health company. So today we will focus on the novels, and Nina, I'm just going to pass the word now to you. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat. And after Nina's presentation, in about 40 minutes, we will have Q&A.
Minimize this. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dora and Sebastian, for inviting me to present a little bit about my book, The Gallery of Beauties, and my series, which is called The Venice Beauties, to you all. So first of all, it takes place, are set in Venice, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about myself and the questions I usually get when people find out I wrote a book or a series of books. They always say to me, what motivated you to write a book? What possessed you to write about Venice in this time? And where did you get all your information for this book? So hopefully during these talks, you will get the answers to all those questions. So first of all, I have to get this to advance. Hold on a minute. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to advance. Hold on, I will have to stop sharing for a minute and try it again. See why it's not sharing. Okay. Okay, let me try it again. Times. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to try again, and hopefully this time it will work. Okay. So one of the things that, as I mentioned, as Dora mentioned, I'm descendant of the chief rabbi of the ghetto, but I'm also a rabbi's daughter, and both sides of my family, my mother's family and my father's family, are both rabbis for many generations. But the real thing that spurred me to write a book or to do anything creative was because my mother always challenged me with the side. Every time we'd say, "Oh, I'm so bored," my mother would always say to us, "A creative person is never bored." And that was a challenge. And I developed, talents. I had talent in writing and I had talent in art. And both of them were I was kind of torn about which one to pursue, whether I should pursue a career in writing or a career in art. In the end, I decided to go and pursue a career in art. And I went to Parsons School of Design, where I studied, I did love books. I always loved books. So I studied children's book illustration with Maurice Sendak. He was my teacher, and he was a really fantastic teacher and a great guy and a great storyteller. And this is some of my illustration. If you know Maurice Sendak's work, you can see how it does have a little bit of a feel of what Sendak did. So I always was tied to art, because one of the things we did in his class was you had to write your own book and then illustrate it. So I was an illustrator writer. We had to read a lot of books and illustrate a lot of books. So I was always kind of steeped in the writing world as well as the art world. But it gave me a unique perspective, and it also gave me I still had this desire to always write. So I always kind of kept it on the back of my mind that someday I was going to write a book. And so one day I did write a couple of chapters of the book. And so I always kept it at the side, and I always thought that I'd write about it. And it was really about Venice that I had started writing about. I'll give you a little reason why for that. And just to give you of how my books actually got published, is that I decided to go to a writers' conference that I'd
Excuse me,
always
but
heard
could you
about.
speak more slowly? You're just racing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm used to talking fast. I'm a New Yorker, so we talk very fast here. So I was really interested in writing historical fiction, historical mysteries, because that's what I like to read. And I found out about a writers' conference that was called Killer Nashville, and it was for mystery writers. And I decided to go to this conference, and I brought with me about 8 or 9 chapters of this work that I had started. I didn't know what it was about yet. I didn't know what it was called. And what they would do at this conference is you gave in the first 2 pages of your manuscript. And it was, you'd give it in to a panel of editors and agents. And somebody would read your first 2 pages, and then the editors and agents would critique it and tell you what you needed to do to make it ready for publication and what they would be interested in. So I gave in my first 2 pages, they read it, and then one of the agents there said, "Oh, I really love this. Can you please send me the full manuscript?" Well, I didn't have a full manuscript, and I didn't even know how to do a full manuscript. But luckily at this conference, I met a lot of people who were really, really nice to me and really helped me build it into a full novel. And I did create it as a full novel, and I was submitting it. And I submitted to my publisher, Level Best Books. They are a mystery publisher, but they have a division that publishes only historical fiction as well. And it was right for them. And they commissioned me they bought this book, and they also commissioned me to write 2 more books in the series. And so that's how the Venice Beauties mysteries were born. Well, later on, that first year, the book came out in 2022, and it was nominated. It was a finalist for Best First Novel in the Agatha Awards, which is awards for mystery novels. And that same Killer Nashville conference I went back to, and it was nominated as the Best Historical in 2022. So that was a really big moment for me, because it kind of validated that what I tried to do and what I kept as my secret desire was something that, could come see the light of day. So that is how I got published. And now I'll tell you a little bit about the book, the first book, which is the main book, which is the Gallery of Beauties. The Gallery of Beauties is about an English lord comes to Venice on his grand tour, as many English lords did in those days, to collect things, beautiful art, paintings, whatever he could, for his estate in England. However, Venice was known for its beautiful women, so he had the great idea instead to collect the portraits of the 12 most beautiful women in Venice. And he wanted them from all walks of life, and he gave the commission to a local artist named Qesher. Well, after these portraits are commissioned, strangely enough, one by one, the subjects of the portraits are found poisoned. And so it's up to 2 of the subjects of the portraits, one of them, the rabbi's scholarly daughter, Diana, and the other one, Belladonna, an elite former courtesan, to try to unmask the killer. Now, part of the story is about Diana. It's a dual narrative between Diana and Belladonna, but a lot of it is focused on Diana, who is a scholarly woman, who's educated, who's the daughter of the rabbi, but who's very steeped in Jewish traditions, but is chafing to get out of the ghetto. She wants to see what's in the outside world. And meeting the artist and learning about portraiture was something that really intrigued her, because there were no portrait artists in the ghetto. There were no people getting their portraits painted in the ghetto. And there's something about that mystical experience that she wanted to understand about the connection between the subject and the painter when art is created. It's kind of the interest in what is inspiration, what brings great art to light. And so one of the things, I'm going to read you a little portion here, where because she is a scholar and she's also interested in Kabbalah, she has a close relationship with her father, who is the rabbi, And she wants to know a little bit more about the Kabbalistic themes and about the mystical transmigration of souls. Her father was against using Kabbalah because this was the age of reason in, this is the Renaissance Venice, and was the age of reason. And the rabbi, like other rabbis of that time, believed that embracing rationalism and showing the non-Jewish world that what Jews were really like, and sticking to, that they were regular people and that they're very rational, and staying away from these kind of mystical and themes that talk about possession, they felt in Kabbalah would get them back into the themes that had originally caused, the non-Jews to attack Jews and come up with all kinds of things against them. So they were very against Kabbalah. So in this scene, Diana is with her father at night. She's been approached by the artist to pose for her portrait. She's kind of mulling it over in her mind, but she wants to know a little bit more about this transmigration of souls. The transmigration of souls? Bah, the rabbi pursed his lips and pointed to the notation on his paper. More and more rabbis are falling under their spell. Their followers are growing. I had not thought the concept of reincarnation was universally accepted by our rabbis, Diana said, searching her memory. Pinching the bridge of his nose as if suffering from a headache, her father explained, "You are correct in your assumption. The concept of reincarnation or transmigration of souls is not written anywhere in the Torah. The Kabbalists believe each person's essence is a part of the divine spark. And so according to them, one man's soul can be exiled into another's. A nice esoteric philosophy, but why stir such things up now? The last thing we need is tales of Jews in possession to get about." The rabbi paused, looking into her eyes. "What do you think? Do you agree?" Diana bit her lip to keep from blurting out everything about her portrait and the Gallery of Beauties. Looking away from him, she nodded absently, and her father pushed back his chair and stood. "I am sure it is very late, and we both should get our sleep. Good night, dear girl." The fire had just died, and the candle was sputtering its final moments when father and daughter went to their respective beds. Lying back, staring at the dark beams of the ceiling, Diana thought the Kabbalist's interpretation was highly similar to the artist's description of his connection with his subjects while he painted them. How very interesting. Although Diana firmly believed in rationalism, perhaps a short-term transference of souls was possible. Was it a spark of divinity, as the Kabbalists prescribed, that guided the artist's brush? Diana burned to experience it herself. It may mean deceiving her father and throwing away all caution, but now she was more determined to visit the artist's studio to find out. So that's kind of the background of what Diana is looking for when she goes and becomes part of this group that are being painted for the Gallery of Beauties. The other part of it is she is exposed now to a world outside of the ghetto, in particular, the salon of Belladonna, where the artist takes her. And Belladonna is considered the most influential woman in Venice. And what Diana does not know is that Belladonna is connected to her family because her older brother, Isaac, who became a corsair, once rescued Belladonna and brought her to Venice. And he is Belladonna's one true love. Now, getting back to how did this all come together? Like, how did I come up with this book? Where did this all come from? There were three factors that led to the development of the Gallery of Beauties. The first one was I actually visited a real Gallery of Beauties, and that Gallery of Beauties is in Munich, in Nymphenburg Palace. And you can see a little bit snippet of it here, but it's the portraits of hundreds of beautiful women from Munich. The second one, I had read the autobiography of Leon de Modena, who's probably one of the most famous figures of the Venetian ghetto. And he was a Renaissance man as well as a rabbi. And he wrote a lot about music, art, and wrote plays and biographies. And lastly, about Venice itself, which was again known for its beautiful women. That was one of the attractions that brought people to Venice on their grand tour. But the other thing that it was known for, which plays in well to a mystery plot, was the fact that it was also the capital of poison. It's where assassins went to get the most undetectable poisons they could find. So bringing all these three factors together helped build this novel for me. And as far as what Dora referred to is I had a personal connection that always entranced me about Venice. And this is the fact that our Sabbath candlesticks, which you can see right here, which my mother's mother escaped from Vienna and the Nazis. It's one of the few things she took with her. But my mother once turned it over the way you see here and showed me that they were hollow. And these little legs things, where she said were added on later on, but that it was a torch holder that was probably pawned in the pawn shops in the ghetto. And that's what she was told as a child, that this was a torch holder and it was pawned in the ghetto. So that always made me very curious to see what the ghetto of Venice was like, and that my mother's family had lived in Venice centuries ago, and there were some people in her family who still lived in Venice till the 1990s before they moved to Israel. So a little bit about the Gallery of Beauties and what that was about and how it influenced me. So the big thing about the Gallery of Beauties was Ludwig I, who was the king of Bavaria, commissioned his court painter to paint the portraits of the most beautiful women of Munich from all walks of life. And it was his way of honoring the beautiful women and showing off how beautiful the women of Munich were. And in particular, he wanted to show everyday women. And I thought it was so interesting. The interesting thing about this, and there was a book that also collected the pictures of all these beautiful women of Venice, of the portrait gallery of Nymphenburg Palace. And each one of these portraits, there's a story about the women in the portraits. For example, this woman here, this young, beautiful woman, he saw her when she was delivering toys for his grandchildren. And she thought she was so exquisitely beautiful. He had her painted, and he gave her this costume to wear to be painted in. So each one of these women had a different story. There was even a Jewish woman who was one of these portraits, who was the daughter of one of his accountants. So I thought that that motif of having a portrait gallery and having these unique portraits and these different stories of these beautiful women who are the subjects of the portrait was something that could work really well when I created my novel. Little known to me when I started writing this novel, and I did research on galleries of beauties, that there was such a custom for noblemen to commission portraits of beautiful women for their homes. And there were a lot of galleries of beauties. There's a gallery of beauty in, Versailles, that Louis XIV had. But I didn't even know. I'd been to Hampton Court Palace many times. But then when I went there, knowing what I knew about Gallery of Beauties, I found that there were two Gallery of Beauties at Hampton Court Palace. One was created for Charles II, and there were the portraits of all his mistresses. They used to be in Whitehall, and they were moved to Hampton Court Palace. And the second one was a Gallery of Beauties created for William I, and there were paintings of women of court. And they were painted there as constant. He kept them, who used that room as a room to go into for consolation after he left he lost his wife. And so there are many more stories, and I'm sure if I went to other palaces, I would now be recognized that there are portraits of beautiful women. It was a custom of something that people did, that they put portrait galleries of beautiful women in their palaces. And then another factor came to play. I was in the National Portrait Gallery of London, and I discovered this man who was Thomas Howard, the Lord of Arundel. He lived in the same time period in the early 17th century, and he was known as the Collector because he went on his grand tour to Europe, including Italy, to collect as much art and artifacts as he could for his estate. And in fact, if you go to Oxford, you'll find the Arundel marbles, which are classic sculptures from Rome, which were part of his collection. And his portrait here was painted by Peter Paul Rubens. There's also a full-length portrait in the Isabel Gardner Museum right next to the empty canvases. So this is a real person, and he really went to Venice to collect art at the time point of my story. And then when you think about it, somebody who's collecting art to decorate their palace, wouldn't they bring their designer with them? So Inigo Jones, who was, again, a real person and a famous designer, and who did also go to Venice at this time period, he came to study the designs of Palladio and was considered the English architect to bring the classical style of Roman and Italian Renaissance architecture to Britain. So these two are the people who come and have commissioned the portrait gallery of the Gallery of Beauties and are based on real people who did come to Venice at one time or another and were collectors of art. And now, as I mentioned, one of the intriguing things and for a novel is to create characters that intrigue people and that involve people. And the Gallery of Beauties gave me the opportunity to create these personas of these 12 women who are these beautiful women of Venice and are the subjects of the portrait gallery. But I wanted to make them true to the time. So I did research and I found something very unusual about Venice, which you don't find in many of the other European countries. So women in Venice had a lot more freedom and independence to actually work. The other big thing is that if their husband died, they could inherit his estate. Now that was something that didn't happen in France or in England. And so, you know, they could be a widow at a young age and have a lot of money at their disposal. So there was a lot of things that were open to women of Venice that you wouldn't find anywhere else. And that's how I created some of my characters. So there's a character called Mirata Ferrazzi, who is a woman glassmaker. And she was based on two women who were real life glassmakers in Venice. And unusually, their families owned glassmaking factories. And those factories, and even though the fathers had sons to leave the factories to, each one of them left the factories to their daughter, recognizing that their daughter had the talent and the business sense to run the glassmaking business the way they wanted it to be run. And in fact, two of these women, Marietta and Harmonia, each of them created masterpieces that were sustained and they were famous for in their day and still are around today. The other characters that I have in the Gallery of Beauties, whose portraits are painted, are two women singer-composers, Gaspara and Cassandra. And they are based on a real artist, singer and composer who was the most published composer of her era, and her name was Barbara Strozzi. So again, this was unusual because when you read about some of the other composers who lived at that time in other countries, they were not able to get their work published. And they were not able to perform as much as the women of Venice were. And then there's another character who is a prodigy, who is based on two women prodigies who lived in Venice again at this time point. One was Modesta Pozzo, who was known to have a photographic memory. She was an essayist and a poet, and she would perform her poems in public, much like my character gives a dissertation in public. And Elena Cornaro Piscopia, who was a noble woman. And she was also a known prodigy. She spoke several languages. She was a brilliant mathematician. And she was the first woman in the world to earn a university degree from the University of Padua. Huh. Now, the other thing I touch on in the book is the role of how Jews lived in the ghetto. Now, the Venetian ghetto and Venice in general, it was if you want to say somewhat of a meritocracy, because it wasn't solely ruled by aristocracy. It was really that commerce was king. So if you could make money there, you would be on top of one of the powers of the city. And the Jews brought in money just because they brought in trade. But also what was interesting is that Jews were required to pay a special residence tax for living in Venice. And that tax was 3 to 10 times more than the average citizen. So actually every Jew that lived in Venice put money in the pockets of the city. And the only requirements, the real restrictions they had, was that they must live in the ghetto and they must not leave the ghetto at night. And they must wear a distinctive yellow badge or hat. And this painting is a painting from Montagna, the artist Montagna, and it's of the Virgin Mary. And you could see she's wearing the yellow turban, which was some of the things. There were different stories about what women had to wear and whether it was enforced in women at all. But most commonly, and when the Jewish Museum in the ghetto was open, you'd see a garment that had a yellow circle on it. And a lot of the times they were forced to wear a yellow circle. So that was one of the things. And the idea was they wanted to make sure the Jews would be marked because they were very afraid of Jews intermarrying with them, with non-Jews, with Venetians. And Jews were also barred from owning land, becoming members of guilds or apprenticeships. And that's why you didn't see any portrait artists in the ghetto. Now, I always wanted to know, I always heard the Jews were locked up in the ghetto and they couldn't leave until, they were locked up at sundown and couldn't leave until the morning. But I didn't understand physically how that happened. And I went on a tour, I was just in Venice, and I went on the tour, and the tour guide told me, well, actually, it was a drawbridge. And then I found this piece of art that actually shows you that. So you can see right here, there was a drawbridge that was let down when the gates were open and pulled up and shut when the gates were closed. So that's how they prevented Jews from entering or leaving past the hours. There were exceptions to the rule. Evidently, doctors were allowed to come and go. Non-Jews could come and go whenever they wanted, either into the ghetto or out of the ghetto. And there was bribery that went on, that you could bribe they had guards that supervised these gates to let you out. But in general, if you were found outside of the ghetto, you could be subject to a penalty of fine or imprisonment. And that's something Diana, who leaves the ghetto at night right now, is afraid of, because if she is caught, she doesn't know what could happen to her. Now, a little bit, again, the second influence on me was reading the autobiography of Leon de Modena, this rabbi who was a Renaissance man, who was a scholar, a playwright, a poet, an orator, historian. But the interesting thing about him, he was a compulsive gambler. So, what a character. And when I first wrote the manuscript, I wrote it as Rabbi Modena being the main character and being the detective. But as I developed it, I really couldn't feel it. So I kind of went to his daughter. And in the book, one thing that's true is that people came from all over, non-Jews would come to the ghetto to listen to his speeches, his sermons. And he did have a long-term friendship with the ambassador of England, who's in the book, Sir Henry Walton. And Sir Henry Walton commissioned him to write a treatise about Jews, what Jews were like, in English, which was very popular in England at the time, because Jews had not been allowed in England since 1200. They had been banished, and they only came back to England with Oliver Cromwell, I think in the late 1640s, early 1650s. But he also possessed a lot of books on medicines and remedies, and that's one of the reasons people came to the ghetto, was to buy medicines and remedies. In my book, Rabbi Leon de Modena possesses a special book from the Arab physicians called the Book of Medicines by Ibn Said, which not only had the recipes for poison, but most importantly, had the recipe for the antidote for poisons, which was called Venice triacle. And that, again, is a true antidote that used to apply to most poisons. And in the book, only Leon de Modena and his daughter, Diana, know how to properly concoct this Venice triacle using the book. Now, the other famous resident of the ghetto, that if you go to the museum there in the Venetian ghetto, you'll hear about her, is Sarah Copio Sulam. And what's very interesting about Sarah Copio Sulam, aside from the fact that she actually ran a salon from the ghetto, that she was a scholar, a playwright, and poet that was famous throughout Europe for her writing, and that she launched amateur theatricals from her mansion. And this is her mansion, which still exists in the ghetto and is now used as the Jewish community center for the community there. But this was her mansion, and her mansion was said, she was very wealthy, was said to rival the mansions of some of the aristocrats on the Grand Canal. But she had fans all across Europe for her writing. And one of these fans was a cardinal from Genoa, who wrote an epic poem about Queen Esther, which was a very popular topic in those days. And he dedicated the play to her. And then he started writing her and asking her to convert. And then she stopped writing to him. And when she stopped writing to him, he accused her of heresy. And she was able to write a treatise refuting the accusation of heresy, and the charges were dropped against her. But when people think that Jewish women are kind of second-class citizens, not allowed to study or things like that, Sarah is a clear example, as were other women scribes and scholars that lived in that time period, that there was no prohibition for women to learn, to write, to study anything they wanted in the ghetto, in in this setting. Another topic that I thought was very interesting to bring into the Gallery of Beauties is that the time point of when the story is set is during the time of Carnival, which had a lot of relaxing of some of the usual restrictions on everybody. Everybody kind of let loose a little bit, but it was also Purim. Carnival coincided with Purim. So essentially you had two different groups of people. Inside the ghetto, they're wearing masks, and outside the ghetto, they're wearing masks. And for Diana, going out of the ghetto and wearing a mask also hides her identity to another extent. And also she got to attend a masked ball. Belladonna would hold a masked ball at the opening of Carnival. And one of the other practices that I found, and I did a lot of research by looking at paintings of Carnival, because a lot of things aren't captured in books. And this was from some paintings that I saw in a collection in Venice, which one of the things they had is and this is in the book, they had a zip line that went from the top of the tower, escaping what it's called right now, the tower that's right next to the Doge's Palace. And there was a zip line that went from the top of this tower down to the balcony of the Doge's Palace. And an acrobat would go descend down the zip line, and they called it the Flight of the Turk. And he would land on the balcony of the Doge's Palace. And if the Doge approved, he'd get a gold medal for it. And some of the other things that happened were there were also these human pyramids, acrobats that did all kinds of things in Piazza. This was all in Piazza San Marco. And this practice of doing this zip line going from the minaret, the tower, down to the Doge's Palace was reenacted a couple of years ago at the opening ceremonies of Carnival, except they have a woman dressed as the Queen of the Carnival, and she descended on the zip line, kind of like Tinkerbell. But then I read that this year they're not doing that. But some of the other practices where they have a parade of beautiful women, that also has been resurrected as part of the Carnival celebrations. So bringing in that spectacle of Carnival, as well as what was going on in the ghetto, which would open up its gates during Purim, where people would be dancing in the streets, particularly their stories of the women and how they would dance in the streets during Purim in beautiful dresses, and people from outside the ghetto would come to see their clothing and the way the synagogues were draped in all kinds of beautiful fabrics. So one of the other crucial scenes takes place, is Belladonna's palazzo. And I really wanted to, she runs a salon from her palazzo, and her salon looked more like something like this, as you can see right in here. And I got the chance to go into these palazzos and see what it looked like, because during the Venice Biennale, which is the art festival, they open up a lot of these palazzos and they put artwork inside the palazzos. So that's how I was able to get in to see these beautiful palazzos, where there was a lot of mirrors, there were large windows, glass sconces and glass chandeliers to reflect light. But one part that's really a big portion of the murder mystery in the books is this landing here. This is how boats would come into the palazzos. There was a landing gate, and the gondola would pull in here, and as people would disembark and then go up to the next floor. But this is where Diana discovers the body of the young courtesan Juliana when her gondola comes into the gate. So I'm just going to read you a little bit about that scene and how she finds this body of the poisoned, of who's Belladonna's protege. A beautiful woman, richly dressed in fine velvet and silvery brocade, lay reclining in the seat, but strangely not moving. Her unmarked skin was pale, and she seemed as if she were deep in sleep, the fine lace of her bodice forming a shroud for her throat. As frozen as a statue, and although it was cold and damp, she gave not one shiver and made no attempt to huddle or close her half-open cloak. So that gives you an idea. I wanted to use something that was about a poison, but that wouldn't be, she would be hardly convulsed, and that's how I chose what poison I chose for this as well. But they find her body as they find other of the subjects of the portraits who are also poisoned in a similar manner. Now getting into poison, where did the poison come from? So again, I did a lot of research on the different poisons and found that Venice was the capital of poison. And one poison was created by a woman. Her name was Julia Tofana. She was actually from Rome, but her poison was widely used by women because it was odorless, colorless, and tasteless. And as I mentioned, if you were a woman and your husband died, you could inherit all his property, unlike other places. So a lot of these poisons were called inheritance powders. And this is an actual bottle of the way the poison aquatofana was rumored to come in. It was labeled Mana of St. Vincent. And it was this poison that you could apply it to the skin as well. And you could kill somebody by, instead of just ingesting it, it could also be applied to the skin. And that's something that's very important as the means of how the women are poisoned. Now, the other part of, when you think about who could have poisoned these beautiful women in Venice, there's who could have poisoned them and why were they poisoned? So the big fear was that it was the Council of Ten. The Council of Ten were the 10 magistrates who meted out justice and also ran the Assassins Bureau of Venice. And they were also known, so this was where they sat in the Doge's palace, and this is the room where you would go into to receive sentence if you were to receive your verdict, if you were brought before them on whether you should go to the jail or you'd be released. It was also a way there's something that's called the Boca de Leon, and it's this kind of suggestion box kind of thing where you could stick a note in this mouth here, which was on the side of the Doge's palace, and you could basically inform on somebody to get the magistrates to investigate that person. So the summons to the Doge's palace was what struck fear into the hearts of everybody. And they were to be feared. And the question was, could they have been, with their knowledge of poisons, could they have been the ones who ordered the death of these beautiful women by poison? So now a little bit about, coming to the end of my talk, and I just wanted to tell you that was the starting book that introduces the series of the Venice Beauties Mysteries. There are 2 other books in the series. The second book in the series is called The Courtesan's Secret, and that book really focuses on the courtesan Belladonna and her backstory. Where did she come from? How did she come to be called Belladonna? And what happens to her, I tried to reverse it, whereas in the first book, Diana is coming out of the ghetto, the enclosed world, and coming into the outside world and is learning all about it. But in the second book, I thought it would be interesting to see what happens when somebody from the outside world is forced to hide in this very enclosed, secluded world of the ghetto and understand what it looks like, what Jewish customs and practices look like to an outsider's eye. So what happens to Belladonna is two men from her past come to Venice. One is her long lost brother that she thought had been killed. And he comes to Venice bearing a map to a treasure, which the Spanish and the English are both after. And when he disappears in Venice, all eyes look to her. They don't know that she's his sister, but they do know that they're connected and basically think that she was his lover. So they're all after her. And so she must hide in the ghetto where she can try to find him and find out what is going on and escape this Spanish assassin. And along with this is, the love of her life. Isaac also comes back when he knows that she's being threatened by the Spanish. And he comes out into this book as well. So they're reunited in The Courtesan's Secret. And then my current book that just came out this week, which is called The Courtesan's Pirate. And that one actually starts in the New World. And it involved a whole bunch of very different research about the Jews and the pirates of the Caribbean. Belladonna and Isaac have left Venice and have gone to try to find a new world, a place for themselves together in the new world. However, when they get there, a hurricane interrupts their plans to be together. It blows Isaac off his ship and allows the Spanish to come marauding into the island of Jamaica where they were. And Belladonna must flee. And she goes to seek shelter among the other islands that aren't controlled by the Spanish, such as Hispaniola and Tortuga and Curacao, which are controlled by French, English, and Dutch pirates. And as she's trying to escape the Spanish, she's also trying to find Isaac, who has been blown off of his ship, and no one knows where he is. And then she hears that he's been captured by Spain, by the Spanish fleet, and he's on his way to Spain. He's being taken to Spain for execution. So she is desperate to save him and realizes her best bet to save him would to be go back to Venice and marshal forces and the power she has and the resources she has to intervene and rescue Isaac from Spain before he gets to Spain. So she goes back to Venice. When she gets there, she finds that being gone for about a year, her influence and power is not what it was, and she still has to use her wits and everything she can to regain her influence. And she finds herself in the midst of a diabolical plot to destroy Venice's maritime trade. And of course, in the machinations of the plot, they manage to find a way to blame it all on the Jews. So Belladonna becomes involved in this plot, as does Diana. But in the meantime, she's still trying to find a way to rescue Isaac, the man she loves, from Spain. So those are the 3 books. And with that, I'm going to ask for any questions.
Thank you so much, Nina. So I'm going to close. Yeah, you can close. Okay. So, but of course, we'll share the recording tomorrow so people can go back to the final slide if they need some information. And now I'm going to read some questions that came into the chat. So there's a question if there's a discussion guide for book groups in the book or online.
I do have a discussion guide that I had prepared for the Jewish Book Council, so I can give you that if you want the discussion guide, but it's not in the book. It was separated. Jewish Book Council asked me to prepare it separately, so I do have that for the first book.
Thank you. So perhaps you can send it to us, and then we can share it with everyone in tomorrow's follow-up email, if you don't mind. Is Ludwig I the same time period as the novel?
No, he was a few centuries later. It was the late 1800s. So it was a couple of centuries later, a century and a half later.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a picture of the Jewish woman painted for the German Portrait Gallery?
Yes, I do. And it's in this book. You can see it. It's called The Gallery of Beauties, The Gallery of Beauties by Ludwig I. And let's see, there's a picture of her.
And because you have like your background is a bit I don't know how.
That's her. Can you see her?
Now we can see it, but because your background is a bit blurred, so we couldn't see the title.
Oh, okay. Well, I can put the title in the chat, but this is her. And her name was Nanette Kaula. So it's pretty interesting.
Great, thank you. Let me see if there are other questions. How did you get such beautiful book covers?
Okay, well, that goes where my art background comes in, because I actually chose the art and gave it to my publisher. I gave her a choice of different pieces of art, and all the artwork are portraits of women from that time period. So my husband thinks they're all ugly, but that was beauty of that time period.
Thank you. I don't see no more questions. There are some people who would like to be in touch with you. Is that okay if we send your email address? Okay.
Well,
great.
I can also give you if you have my website, Beauties.com. And you could sign up for my newsletter, which I constantly update. I send it out about once a month. And I'm also, because of my art background, I write a lot of books that have art as a theme. I have a new series that I'm going to be launching soon, which takes place during the Weimar Republic among the artists of the Weimar Republic. So it's all about the different art movements, and that one's called The Surrealist Circle. It also won an award for Best Manuscript at Killer Nashville. That's still in editing, so it's not coming out real soon, but you can see more about art on our site. We call it Curators of Crime, and we write all about books that have art themes of it. So I can put that in the chat as well.
Thank you. And we will, of course, tomorrow share all these things that Nina is putting in the chat. We're going to collect them and include them in tomorrow's follow-up email. So don't worry about copying or if it's confusing to read it like this, you will receive it tomorrow in an email. So you will have them and you can research it and look back for it. So if there are any other questions or comments, please feel free to write or raise your hand. Can you get the book on Amazon, or what are the platforms where you can get the book?
You actually can get, you can get it on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. You can go into any Barnes and Nobles and order it. They'll order it for you too if you want the hard copy. Like I said, the e-copy is in the libraries, in most libraries. It's in the New York Library, Massachusetts Library. We've done book talks for many libraries. And Target.com has The Courtesan's Secret, the second book. So you can order it from Target as well.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to repeat for those of you who joined later that Nina is going to give a talk about Venice and the history of Venice Jewry and the Venice Ghetto, and also the today's Jewish life in Venice. So those of you who are interested in going deeper in this topic, we really recommend to join us this Sunday for her talk. And if there are more questions, please feel free to write or raise your hand or share your thoughts. Those of you who read the book, if you have anything to comment or add, please feel free to
I will add something that I think would be very interesting about the new book, which takes place, as I told you, in the Caribbean. So I went to the island of Curacao because I wanted to see, you know, I had read the Jews were on the island of Curacao from the early 1600s, and I wanted to see it. So of course I went to the synagogue on Curacao, which is very well known. I don't know if you've seen pictures, but the floor is all sand, it's made out of sand. But the really interesting thing is when I got there, they also have a number of tombstones they've collected that were falling apart from where they were. And they brought them to the synagogue and they have them lined up there. And one of the tombstones had a pirate symbol on it, a pirate skull and crossbones. And they used to use the original pirate flag, had the skull and crossbones, as well as an hourglass. It's called Memento Mori. And so the fact that that was on a tombstone of a Jewish person, which was definitely a Jewish person, it was definitely, a lot of the tombstones also had ships fighting each other. So it seems like this Jewish pirates of the Caribbean were definitely in Curacao, as I had read about. As I had read, and there's a book called Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean, which I used a lot as my source book. And it seems that that tombstone supports the hypothesis that he makes in there about the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean.
Thank you for that addition. And yeah, actually, we've had talks about, and also, I think also in Jamaica, you can find
yes,
it.
In Jamaica, yes. Jamaica was one of the first places Jews, Jamaica and Barbados were also early places. I don't think there are any synagogues, the early synagogues aren't left in Jamaica, but in Barbados there is an early synagogue from 1650 that's left there.
Yes, we got a comment from Mary that that the book is
Yep.
great.
Yep,
Yeah,
that was my source book. Yeah.
It was recommended many times on our different events about the Caribbean, and I'm sure that many of you have read it in the past. Okay, so I don't see no more questions, but I'm sure that there was a lot of information, Nina, that you share with us. And I just see some comments as well that Portuguese Jews dealt with piracy independently and for Dutch and other powers.
Yep.
So yeah, that's an exciting topic, and yes, it comes up a lot in those regions. So thank you so much, Nina, for sharing about your book with us, and thank you everyone for joining us and learning with us. And of course, you'll receive all this information tomorrow. And we hope we can see you in one of these days. So before Nina's session, actually, we will have another talk on Thursday which will be about Minsk in Belarus. So we are traveling now in different parts of the world. And actually, we just had a talk about Barbados now that you mentioned. So those of you
Yeah, I wanted to
joined
join
us
that.
on Sunday, you may have seen the connection when also he referred to Venice, and now you referred back to Barbados. So that's just an interesting way to create the Qesher, the connection between the communities. So thank you also for that, and thank you everyone. We hope we can see you soon. And those of you who are planning to read the book, we hope you will enjoy it and that this session was helpful for all of you to learn. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful.
Thank you, Dora and Sebastian. Take care.
Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting. Thank you. Bye from London.
Bye.
Thank you.